Howdy ESSM 406. Now I want to talk to you about regulatory enforcement, which I'm giving you a reading by Martin Nye, who's a professor at the University of Montana, from the journal Policy Sciences. Now, in the past, I've noticed a couple students get really confused by this. What's regulatory enforcement? So we need to be clear about a few little background things about how our government works. So, Congress makes laws, right? And Congress has or the state legislature makes laws, or the city council might make laws. And they've got a lot of stuff on their plate. So often, particularly at higher levels, state and federal levels, the laws may not specify everything that needs to be done. Typically, what a law will say is, we want this government agency to take these actions. And this government agency is going to have to create regulations, which are laws, but they're laws that the agency makes in order to carry out the wishes of Congress. So as an example, the Clean Air Act instructs the EPA that the EPA is to regulate air pollution. It doesn't say that the EPA should limit the amount of lead that's in gasoline to this amount, that the EPA should require certain cities to implement certain techniques to decrease emissions in those cities. It doesn't say that this chemical or that chemical is allowed or not. Congress just sets very broad guidelines for what EPA should regulate. And then the EPA's job is to carry out those regulations, is to carry out that law by issuing regulations. Same thing with an endangered species. The Endangered Species Act doesn't say anything about bald eagles or wolves or fish or plants. It just says if a species is found to be endangered based on these criteria, the EPA will need to protect, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or if it's a marine animal, the National Marine Fisheries Service, will need to follow these steps. And then they'll follow those steps, and there's actually hundreds of species on the endangered species list. And each one of those has different rules and regulations. So laws also create certain kinds of rights and responsibilities, and certain laws are challengeable in court, and certain regulations are challengeable in court, and certain government actions are challengeable in court. So if you think that the EPA should be regulating a certain pollutant, or should not be regulating a pollutant, or is regulating it incorrectly, not in the wishes of Congress, you can go and file a lawsuit against the EPA. You can file a lawsuit against the EPA. You can go to federal district court and say, the EPA is doing this, and this violates the Clean Air Act, or this violates the Clean Water Act, or this violates the Endangered Species Act, in which case you'd be suing the Fish and Wildlife. So a common thing that happens with endangered species, someone will submit a petition to Fish and Wildlife saying we think this species should be listed as endangered. And Fish and Wildlife will either list it, say yes, this is warranted, this species is endangered. They'll say no, it's not. And immediately someone will sue them and say, no, this is not really endangered, or no, this really is endangered, even though you made the opposite decision. So that's a fundamental part of how our government works. We think of courts as being for criminal matters, but these are civil matters. These kind of lawsuits are often never have a sort of trial like what you would see on TV. It's often just done. Lawyers for the different sides submit briefs. There's no jury. And the court will make a decision. And there's a few laws that even contain provisions called citizen suit provisions. So the Clean Water Act actually allows you as a private individual to sue anyone who's polluting the water for polluting the water, and you can collect damages. So there are lawyers who make their living. They don't work for the government. They make their living enforcing the Clean Water Act. They go around looking for people who are polluting water in illegal ways. They sue them, they go to court, and they say this is illegal, what these people are doing. And they collect damages from the polluters, and that's how they pay their bills. So Many people don't like this because lawsuits are expensive, they're conflictive, and no one likes getting sued. On the other hand, what Martin Nye is saying, and I think it's a very important thing, this is a fundamental aspect of how our system works. If we don't have these lawsuits, we don't have clear rights. And Congress can't make every decision for us. The Texas legislature can't make every decision for us. Some of these things are going to be left vague by the laws, they're going to be left vague by the regulations. And we need this legal system in order to solve these disputes. So the legal system is a very important way. And we've read some examples of very important legal decisions that are made that lead to successful environmental outcomes. The biggest example is actually the example from Eleanor Ostrom's book about how the Southern California groundwater basins came to agreement. Basically, they were all suing each other all the time, and eventually they reached a settlement in court, and that settlement was legally enforceable in court, so it held, because if anyone violated that settlement, the other people would go to court and sue them. So that's what Martin Nye is talking about when he talks about regulatory enforcement.